here are my goals, here are my team's goals, here's the organization's goals, and we have all kind of like blessed the piece of paper that we've written all of this stuff on. And now we're going to go pretend that these are relevant and accurate for the next 11 months of our work.
Yeah. And we're going to pretend that we're actually going to use them, which, yeah. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the show. I'm Rodney Evans, and that guy, our swimming, our merman friend, is Spurlin.
Rodney, that's going to be quite the abrupt introduction, considering I don't think they're going to get the preamble of us talking about swimming for about 15 minutes. Now people just think I'm a merman.
He's a mer person. It's cool.
Roll with it. You like my palm tree shirt in this 9-degree weather that I'm currently experiencing?
That's really funny. You're just dressed for the weather you want, you know?
Exactly. That's literally what I told my wife when I was getting dressed this morning.
You're just like, I'm back on that cruise ship.
Yep.
That's awesome. Welcome back, everybody, to At Work with the Ready. This is a podcast about modernizing organizations as the future of work meets the present moment.
This is the third episode of our mini-series on Depthfinding.
And before we dive in, as always, we're going to do a check-in round. Sam, what you got?
Rodney, what were you really into as a child?
The first thing that comes to mind is make-believe.
Okay.
I
Just
was a big...
Broadly.
Yeah. But of course, because I'm like so bossy, I also was like, I wanted to play make-believe with my friends. I wanted to be in charge of the story and the roles that everyone played. It was very important to me that I was always cast as an animal. Like I always wanted to be like a horse or a dog, not
So you were director
person.
And talent.
Yeah.
Okay.
For sure. And I feel like I grew up in a place where we had a lot of woods, and it was before the internet. So our parents let us go in them because they didn't know that or they didn't care that kids got snatched. And so I feel like my childhood is primarily marked by making up games and worlds with my friends in the woods for like many hours at a time. And there were even woods in the back of my school that we played in. Like we were just in the woods at all times. Yeah.
Awesome. Quick follow-up question. Is there a connection to your life now in terms of the work that you do? Is there a through line? Would that childhood Rodney be like, I see it?
I mean, still so bossy. I do think that so bossy. You are not going to be the horse, Sam. You're going to be the stable guy. I mean, I do think that in terms of our work, like I do a lot of storytelling, you know, like not just on this podcast, which is a thing, but at work, I feel like a lot of my job is to communicate in a narrative that makes sense to people what I see from my perspective. And I think that whether you're trying to get your friends to play make-believe in your world, or you're trying to, create coherence in a diverse membership, the skill set's kind of the same.
Yeah. Totally see it.
Yeah. What about you? I can't wait to hear what you were really into. My mind is already racing.
I spent a decent amount of time in the woods doing similar type things. I would say maybe the way I would describe it is pretending I was in a video game, potentially,
cool.
Casting spells and stuff.
Yeah.
Or just like a fantasy book in general. Is a big like Redwall fan. So, talking animals, swords, things of that nature. But the idea that came to mind for me when I wrote this check-in is that, so I was really into hockey, still am, collecting hockey cards, which I don't do anymore. But what I loved to do was take my hockey cards and type them into a spreadsheet so that I would have them in my spreadsheet.
So that I would have them.
And then I also really liked to physically organize them in different ways. So here's like all of this team or all of this player or like all of this position. And I have a distinct memory of always trying to get my mom to come do this with me because I thought it was fun. And I couldn't understand why she didn't think it was fun. And to her credit, she definitely did occasionally, but she also was able to kind of beg off every once in a while.
That's amazing. And Sam, how do you feel like that relates to your job? Or is it just that it's your whole personality?
Not at all. I don't know what you're talking about. I mean, with that story, you would expect me to like be like a data analyst or something. And that's not really my, I don't do that every day, but I like getting my hands in there and looking at data and trying to like make sense of lots of disparate things that are going on and like see patterns and things of that nature. And I still like hockey. So
yeah, you're a cataloger.
I'm a cataloger.
Maybe not a data analyst, but I feel like you like to organize things and are very good at like turning something into a sharp Kanban board or like a sharp,
Yeah. Cool. All right. Well,
that was fun. That was really fun.
All right, Rodney. So what are we talking about in our third episode of Depthfinding?
So today we're going to focus on the Sunshine Zone. Like the last episode, we're not going to stay in the Sunshine Zone and just do an episode about that. We're going to talk about a couple of cases and how the other zones relate. But just a little explanation of the Sunshine Zone to get us started in case everyone hasn't, committed every aspect of this framework to their memory. The thing is about the Sunshine Zone is that it is very shallow. And when I talk about these things, I am pulling these directly from how oceanographers say this. I didn't make this shit up. So it's a very shallow depth of the ocean, and you can see it from above and below. And I think that's really interesting. Part of the metaphor that we haven't talked a lot about is the idea that the reason these zones are named the way they are is less about their depth and it's about how much light gets through. And we have so many clients that talk to us about transparency. And we've talked so much about transparency that I think that having a metaphor that really explains transparency is cool. Right. So if you think about the fact that you could orient what depth you're at just by how transparent it is, the Sunshine Zone is like the dead easy, super obvious one.
Right.
The other parts of it that I want to say here, and then we'll get into a bunch of stuff, is like people think that because they can see it, that it's the most important and that it's like the most alive. And actually in the ocean, the least action happens in the Sunshine Zone. It's where there are the fewest fish. It's where there's the least like interest, basically. It's just this sort of like superficial, very obvious. Well, and it's where the humans like to be. So human beings like to be at the start. We are buoyant. We like to float more than we are comfortable diving. And so I think part of our love of the surface layer is our own love of the obvious, easy to understand part of anything, whether that's an organization or your New Year's intention or the ocean.
Right. Gotcha. Yeah, there's fewer things. I want to say there's fewer things that will kill us in the Sunshine Zone. So we're like more chill being up there as compared to like, 100 meters down below. Is 100 meters deep? I don't know if that's Twilight Zone or further, but we are not sperm whales. We don't handle the depths particularly well, physically at least.
But what's funny about what you just said, Sam, is like, you're right. I never thought about this, but like, you're right. And the things that will kill you in the Sunshine Zone, but that's not where they live.
Sharks.
And this is the same in an organization. It's like, what's coming to get you is not up there. Right. Like your org chart will not actually kill you. Stuff from below that you can't see is what's coming to rip your arms off. Yeah.
Totally. So
that's so funny.
I have a question for you. In my mind, when I think about the zones of depth finding, Sunshine Zone feels like the bad zone to me, which I don't think we are. I don't think we're part of the model is none of the zones are bad. None of them are good. They just are what they are. But I think because most modern organizations over index on the Sunshine Zone, it kind of gets a bad rap. Can you help me kind of reconceptualize it in a more neutral or positive way?
I can try, but let me ask you first, what seems bad about it? Why do you feel like you have that impression?
Because the badness is just in the nothing inherent to the zone itself, but I think a lot of the examples that we talk about, or at least where my mind goes when I think about depth finding, is like you've got Sunshine Zone stuff that is completely unrooted to Twilight Zone and Midnight. So a lot of the like felt tension you can point to at the Sunshine Zone. I mean, because you can see it. So I think there's just a lot of like negative energy in my brain, kind of like going to the Sunshine Zone and being like, this is where the problems are.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, I think you hit on, I think there are two big things that create reasonable negative associations. One is the dissonance that you just mentioned. It's like we've all had the experience of working in an organization and knowing that the org chart that we were given in onboarding to explain how work gets done has nothing to do with real life. And the idea that you have to hold that bullshit in your head and then informally learn how the network operates is so annoying. It's like, well, just don't make me learn that thing. It's so useless. And I think you could apply that to a lot of Sunshine Zone things. Is it doesn't feel like it's real life. Yeah. And so it's annoying that you have to like salute it, even though it doesn't actually like help you in any way. And then I think the other big one is that so often what is declared in the Sunshine Zone is like some kind of target to be met.
Yeah.
And it's like, you know, I cannot count on one hand how many conversations I've had with leaders who tell me that their strategy is a target.
Right.
And it's just like, first of all, it's so uninspiring. Second of all, it does not feel tied to the sky, really. And it just doesn't, I think it's really hard to make meaning of that. And also, like, you know, you and I both are like physically active and oriented. It's like nobody wants the goal that's just like lose 10 pounds.
Yeah.
It's the worst of all the goals to have. You know, it's like much better goals, at least for me, are about like how much protein I eat and how much I swim and how much weight I can lift and stuff like this. And so much of what's declared in the Sunshine Zone is just, here's your goal weight. Go fucking do it. Like sort of regardless of what it takes. And I think that feels bad.
Yeah, I think so. As someone like actively trying to lose a few lbs right now, my stated goal is not lose the weight. It is get faster in you know a 10K, swim 1,000 meters faster. And ostensibly, if I am able to do those things, it is very likely that I will shed some weight along the way. But hyper fixating on that is not the motivational move to kind of get me out the door.
Yeah. And we see the hyperfixation on a revenue number or on a stock price or on, I had an entire year at an organization where it was return on equity. And then that didn't work. And so the next year was an EBITDA number. And it's just like, it's so empty as the unifying metric for an organization to just have it be like a completely cognitive target unrelated to anything else.
Yeah. And I presume through this episode, we'll talk about kind of like what a better Sunshine Zone could consist of as well.
Yeah, I think so. Because I don't think either of us is going to shy away from saying metrics are super important and we really believe in using data. It's just that I think they're mostly done poorly.
Yeah. All right. So anything else to kind of tee up the idea of Sunshine Zone before we can start talking about some actual examples to tease it apart a little bit further?
I mean, this is where I would just say for people going into this work or this app, like, really pay attention to the relationship between the Sunshine Zone and the Midnight Zone. And, you know, one of the inspos from this model, which came from like my own study when I was doing a lot of coaching, was the ACT matrix, which is the acceptance and commitment therapy. It is like, it's a subset of third wave. It doesn't matter. And the ACT matrix, which I've used at the ready many times, and I use in my own practice all the time, has a horizontal line and a vertical line. And the horizontal line separates inner experience and outer experience. And I think so much of what happens below the surface of an organization and so much of people's own lived experience and the reason they stay and don't and the reason they perform and don't is so related to this like visible, obvious surface layer of what they see and what is held up as being work, quote unquote.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah.
What about you? Is there anything else you want to get in here before we roll?
I'm really enjoying the metaphor, and I think we'll talk more about like what in the metaphor of depth finding, like what is the light? And the light is attention, right? At least that's how I've been thinking of it in a lot of ways. And if you know what like light does when it hits water is that it refracts. And what you think you see in the sunshine zone is actually not 100% reality. If you've ever tried to like scoop a fish out of the water, like everything's slightly a little bit womper jawed. And there's something there that I can't really articulate that also feels true for organizations. Like we have these artifacts of our sunshine zone, and we all think we are seeing them the same way. And yet we don't, because we're different people and we're bringing different things to what this strategy deck is actually saying. I mean, I think it's maybe midnight zone type stuff, but there is something just inherent to how attention light hits water that changes what is actually what we actually see.
That's so cool. I love that. I love it when a new thing pops. I will be thinking about refraction for the rest of today. So Sam, you had an idea for the first sort of case that we talk about today, or cross-functional problem that we address. Why don't you lead us in? We'll probably talk about two, and yours is really cool and really interesting, and it's from a real life client person who is very beloved to us. So, take us in.
Not made up in my brain, the problem or the client, real person here. So the kind of presenting challenge, this person is kind of in an ops, HR sort of kind of hybrid role. And the leadership of their organization wanted them to figure out, like, how do we do goal setting? Like, what is our approach to goal setting in this organization? We have set some organization level goals, and I want you to figure out how to cascade these goals across every team, every individual in the organization. And because they had worked with us for a while, they were immediately kind of uncomfortable with the idea of just how do we cascade these quite financial goals into the rest of the organization. Like, can we do something a little bit more complexity conscious, kind of have people use their brains to figure out, what should my goals be given that we're trying to do this thing over here? And I thought this was an interesting example to talk about because I think goal setting, and whether it's for performance management or kind of operationalizing a strategy or somewhere in between, often really lives in the sunshine zone. Like, we're literally writing down, here are my goals, here are my team's goals, here's the organization's goals. And we have all kind of like blessed the piece of paper that we've written all of this stuff on. And now we're going to go pretend that these are relevant and accurate for the next 11 months of our work.
Yeah. And we're going to pretend that we're actually going to use them, which,
And we're going to pretend, or we're going to probably not explicitly acknowledge all of the midnight zone stuff that goes into writing down what you're going to accomplish over the next year, knowing that your boss is going to pull those up during your annual performance review and be like, all right, let's see how you did on these things. Like, I don't know how you can engage in this exercise and not have that be actively working in your brain as you are writing these things down. And at that point, we're no longer kind of like articulating useful things that will coordinate the complex actions of hundreds of people, but we're all kind of like sandbagging our way to this conversation that's going to happen in 11 or 12 months.
Yeah. In this case, this could be wrong. Jack, prepare to edit. Is the strategy the sky and the goals are sunshine?
Possibly. I mean, one of the things that one of my reflections of this is that I'm not sure that the goal setting exercise, as initially conceptualized by the leadership of this organization, is really connected to the sky at all.
Oh, okay. Well, that's
and I think
not
that's
great.
part of the
It's part of the problem. Yeah.
Part of the problem. Yeah. And I mean, that's probably what's the word I'm looking for? That's probably not the 100% correct take on this. Like, they would say, like, they have a strategy and it's primarily financially focused. It's EBITDA, actually.
And honey, been there. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I think the goal setting right now is not super connected to the sky, beyond just like, here's the EBITDA goals that we have to hit, now everybody figure out how you slot into that.
Yeah. I mean, one of my least favorite goal setting tropes, I don't know if this is happening at this organization, but I know it still happens a lot, is like, there's some kind of strategy and then it has like pillars or like work streams. People love pillars. I would love to know what consultancy invented those fucking pillars that is like holding the roof up. They're just like, everybody's got 4 pillars, which, like, I don't necessarily disagree with, except that it seems like it's an answer to something, which to me is very clearly not. Anyway, that aside, what I often see is like in the goal setting template is like the pillars, and then you have to make some shit up about what you're doing about the pillars.
Yeah.
And it feels like somehow that is meant to add up to an outcome in a way that I'm just like, what mystical math makes that work? That, like, if there's one pillar that's about creating financial efficiency, and I write a goal that's like, I'm going to not backfill when people leave. Like, are we going to get there? I don't know. It just feels, what it is about goal setting is it feels like descriptions of descriptions of descriptions of work, not actual work. It's like, to your fucking hockey card example, it's like, we want to just put down the categories, and we never want to put down like activities or outcomes or impact. And so it's just categories all the way down.
Yeah, exactly. The reason we brought this example is that it's so over-indexed in the sunshine zone for most organizations. Like, the exercise itself is the creation of these goals, and very rarely do we actually kind of step beyond those to talk about, well, what are we actually trying to do with these goals? Like, what do we think we're getting from this artifact that we are spending a lot of time and turmoil trying to create? And then, at least in most cases that I've seen where there's a kind of an annual goal setting process, we have a crazy stressful sprint to make them. And then we ignore them for 10 months. And then we all freak out at the end of the year when we're preparing for the performance management on those goals that we've mostly not been thinking about, not for nefarious reasons, but because complexity, things are changing in the organization. And we are not a bunch of fortune tellers who can tell precisely what is going to happen 6 months from now. And we haven't captured that reality in the goals that now exist in the Sunshine Zone artifact that we're supposed to treat like it's very serious business.
Serious business, capital B business. It's interesting because in the Depthfinding talk that you and I give, we point to a statistic that like 90-something% of executives say that they fail to execute their strategy. Yeah. And to me, this is like, we're talking about goals today, which are, one altitude lower than strategy. But we're right in the pocket of where the execution goes sideways. Yeah. And I have fiddled so much with this over the years, and I'm not sure that I have it cracked. But like, I think this is where the Twilight Zone stuff becomes super important, because what you don't want to do is, which I've definitely seen, is just have your goals be something that you are constantly checking in on to see if you're complying with them. So like, you don't want to use your operating rhythm to just be like, are we red, yellow, green? What's the next deadline? What the fuck is going on? Why are we late? Because that misses the possibility that your goals need to change.
Yep.
But you also don't want to do what you said and spend all this time making them and then never look at them again. So like, what are some of the third ways that you've messed around with for how to do this well?
Yeah. So this is where an operating rhythm comes into play. And I think the key thing here is that, yes, we have a default operating rhythm that we recommend. If you don't know where to start with, something like a monthly retro, quarterly strategy, weekly action meeting, that sort of thing. But rhythm, there's lots of different types of rhythms. There's lots of different speeds of rhythm. There's probably musical terminology that I don't know that describes the rhythm at which something tempo that is happening. Exactly. Thank you. So different types of tempo, and figuring out what is the tempo that we need, not even as an organization, but as a team, as a division in this organization. What is that tempo for us that's not too fast, where we're always checking in on things that haven't really changed all that much, or if they have changed, it's at a superficial level and we get way too wrapped up in that, or so slow that we're not checking in at all about what has actually changed. And that takes experimentation. I think start with a default and then see if that feel good or bad. I sometimes talk about an organization having different speed metabolisms, and some of our clients can metabolize an operating rhythm very quickly. Like the nature of their work is we just have to be kind of checking in on this stuff pretty quickly, because lots of stuff changed very quickly. And others, for whether it's bureaucracy reasons or nature of work reasons, their metabolism is much slower, and trying to do too much just creates like a backup within their own ways of working. So that's where my head goes first. I'm wondering what you're thinking about.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things. One is if your goals are annual, which I know a lot of you can't avoid because #performance management, you have to create something shorter term to steer, whether that's, monthly sprint outcomes or quarterly outcomes. My team does half year outcomes because we've realized quarter is too short, annual is too long, whatever. And those things should feel really tangible, and like they have to live in the meeting where you talk about project work. Like they have to be in the board or in a Google Doc. You have to look at them every week, whatever horizon they're on, and then have your conversation about projects and unblocking work or retrospectives or whatever. And then go like, are we closer or are we farther from these outcomes? And if we're farther, is that because they're wrong? Right. Just that conversation is going to get you like 50% of the way there, because it is a human feedback loop. And I feel like sometimes when people talk about feedback loops, everybody loves those words, but they think that it is like a mechanism feedback loops tend to involve human reflection for now, until like the agents do this for us. So for now, you got to make your own, you are the loop, Yeah. And I just don't think that is a habit for a lot of teams. Another thing, and this was actually something that I learned when I was worked at a bank, and it wasn't used, I would say, optimally, but it was a cool concept, was like there was run the bank work and change the bank work. And I think in goal setting, we tend to have so much of it be change the bank work is what we write down. And we don't write a goal that's just like, do your job well.
Yeah.
Don't don't let quality slip on delivery or on customer experience or on coding bugs or on cycle time or whatever your thing is. We have a real hesitance to be like, don't sacrifice doing your job that runs this place for doing these other things. And I'm curious, like, I'm curious about the psychology of that, because everybody wants to do something different, and then immediately is like, oh God, but I already have a full-time job. Yeah. Why is that?
I think there's something about being attracted to novelty. Like, as human beings, I think that is somewhat ingrained in us. But I think there's also just, I don't know, where my mind goes is the nature of capitalism, and that if you're not growing, you're dying. And so you take that within an organization, and if you're not part of the new thing, part of the growing thing, then you're automatically under threat. And I'm not saying that is true or it should be that way, but I think that is often what is going on. And I think it's easier to kind of heap recognition on taking something from 0 to 1, where there once was nothing. We have a thing. Look at all these people who worked on it. Look at how great they are. Versus, like, we did a thing, our business as usual work, like 2% better.
Right.
And like, who gets jazzed about that? Although arguably we should be. And like, the stuff that we do business as usual allows us to invest in new things. And if we lose that, then we can't do the other stuff as well. So there does need to be, I think, in most organizations, kind of a recalculation of where we put time and attention and recognition and praise.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I also think that I don't see a lot of teams having conversations when we have an outcome that we're steering toward, like week on week or whatever, that's like, this is good enough for now. Like, this is working well enough. Let's just leave it alone.
Yeah.
Everybody's so fucking, like, we're so optimization oriented that I think it's really difficult. So I say this because that is such a team sport. That is such a Twilight Zone team sport. And I've seen it happen in the team that I am part of, where in a feedback conversation, someone will be feeling a way about not having done net new blah, blah. And the team will be like, yo, you are running the operations of this company very well. Just do that. Like, don't work. Like, that is more than a full-time job. Doing it correctly prevents a huge amount of work in the future. The day will come when we can do something new, but it's not today. This is great. Keep going.
Yeah.
And that feels, I think, like countercultural in a lot of places.
Yeah, no, I think that is absolutely correct. And yeah, I don't know how to kind of break that. I don't know if it can be. I'm sure it can be. It's a kind of a group recalibration of what is important.
Yeah, that's right. And it's like, like so many things we talk about, it's like, leaders love to say, like, good enough and 80-20 and blah, blah, blah. But then these are the moments in the Twilight Zone, in the actual meeting, where you go, don't keep fiddling with it. It's fine. Yeah. The other thing about the novelty point that you made, Sam, is I think this is classic. We have a Sunshine Zone problem and we'll try to solve it in the Sunshine Zone. Like, we're not making enough revenue. We're not making enough profit. We're not evolving fast enough. Let's declare a new thing rather than looking deeper.
Yeah.
And that's totally a cycle that you guys, everybody has to break that cycle. And I've said it before, I say it all the time. We always go back to the Deming quote of every system is perfectly designed to get the results that it does. And anytime I'm at a client or looking at the ready and there's something amiss, I'm like, it's something in here that we haven't addressed. And it's probably something in the Twilight Zone.
Yeah, totally. One of the things that I'm learning to really like about Depthfinding, and this came out in a conversation with the client who kind of inspired this topic, we got to talking about how you can use this as a tool for managing up. So the result of this is not like, oh, don't do good work in the Sunshine Zone. Like, there will always be things in the Sunshine Zone, whether you deliberately make them or not.
Yeah.
But can you use something like Depthfinding to say, great, we need this thing in the Sunshine Zone. We have this thing in the Sunshine Zone. We're making it But in order for it to work, we got to look at some of the Twilight Zone stuff. And we have to look at what this is bringing up for people in the Midnight Zone, and not to do their work for them or like wring our hands about it, but to just be honest about how do we think this Sunshine Zone thing, whether it's goal setting, a strategy, or whatever, is actually going to manifest in the behavior and the action that we want to see in our organization. Give me some support here in the Twilight Zone. Give me support here in the Midnight Zone. And now you're having a much more conducive conversation, a more productive conversation than like, how do we make the Sunshine Zone thing prettier or better?
Or better. I totally agree. The thing about that, Sam, that I think you're not saying is that any Sunshine Zone, any pillar or any goal set in the Sunshine Zone cannot be delegated to one person or team to go make happen.
Yeah.
And I want to put a fine point on this because it's not just about like HR getting the goal that's about fucking building the culture and, you know, delighting human or whatever, a delightful employee experience or whatever nonsense. It's like, I see this happen with strategy. I see this happen with innovation. It's basically like anything that's in the too hard category in the Sunshine Zone, they just give to a really, really smart person and are like, you go wrangle them and you make this happen. And it's like, I don't think the chief strategy officer is not an important role or is a role that shouldn't exist, because I think that like the skill set that those people and teams have and the remit to do the sensing and think about the direction and blah, 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 I think is important. I don't think you can totally just like hope that emerges, but you can't just be like, okay, and then you also are responsible for execution, especially at scale. And I feel like it's the same with the chief people officer and culture. They go, we want the culture to be this. I hope this employee experience team has got it so the rest of us can like get back to our real jobs. We can't do that stuff.
No, and this is part of what makes organizations so frustrating and challenging is like we at least a lot of the HR leaders that I talk to, like they will agree that they don't necessarily think that just having a people-focused outcome or goal is the move. And also at the same time, if they are kind of handed some goals from on high and there's not a people thing in there or an acknowledgement that people make this thing happen, also are kind of like, ugh. So like, I don't know, like, I think it just goes to show like the stuff that lives in the Sunshine Zone is really important. And we need to be thoughtful about it, but we can't just leave it at that level. I think I think if I could like sum up the agita that I feel around a lot of Sunshine Zone stuff and how organizations think about it, is that there's something about the prettier our Sunshine Zone stuff is, the better we are as an organization. Like the more like we've tied it all up into a pretty bow and it lives here at the Sunshine Zone, which must mean that we're good. And you're not good. You've just got some Sunshine Zone stuff that we can see.
You just got stuff. Yeah, I think that's right. It's funny because I also, you know, your comment about like a culture goal being declared, it's like, I feel the same way, where on the one hand, I appreciate the accountability that creates for an organization not to just ignore the human experience or the human cost of doing good work. And on the other side of that, and then like I'll immediately flip and be like, yeah, but the way to do that is not to like have one goal and hand it to HR and be like, go do this. So there is something there where on the one hand, I'm always going to be an advocate for specificity and not using jargon and goals and having them feel really understandable and really tangible. And this is a really big part of creating participatory organizations, because when leaders are hesitant to be explicit in setting a goal, what is sometimes under that is that they don't want to be pinned down and they don't
Right.
want to have to define what good looks like because they don't know. And they want to be able to have an organization or a workforce that's playing how big is the bread box. And I think that's bad. Just to be really clear, like, I think if you are someone who is in the role of setting the goals or approving the goals, and you're unwilling to hem yourself in, and you're unwilling to make the rules of the game explicit, that's bad. Like, you should not expect good performance if you're unwilling to take on the risk and the vulnerability of defining what good performance is.
Totally. And you're moving us in this direction, so maybe I'll just explicitly knock us into it. Like, what is going on for folks in the midnight zone when we over-index on the sunshine zone stuff? So I'm not talking about necessarily goal setting specifically, although we can continue to use that example, but just the pattern of let's hyper focus on the sunshine zone stuff at the expense of basically every other zone. Like, what is going on? What sort of midnight zone things come up for you when you think about an organization that is hitting that pattern really hard?
Yeah. I mean, there's so many things. The first one is, so I'm taking cello lessons. I think I've mentioned that on this show. And I haven't taken cello lessons since I was a kid, and I was only doing classical training. And now I'm only doing not that. So I'm only working on improvisation and playing by ear, which is very threatening to my ego. And my teacher said to me the other day, I basically was saying, like, yeah, I don't want to practice. Like, I don't want to practice. And because I was a very accomplished classical cellist, he was like, yeah, because you're used to it sounding good. And what this is going to require is ugly sounds coming out of that instrument. And you basically refuse to sit there and listen to ugly sounds.
Yeah.
And he's absolutely right. And it's so funny because the previous day I had been practicing, and I was doing what I was supposed to be doing for like 10 minutes, and it sounded like shit. And I pulled out like an old, like a box suite, and was just like, I'm going to play this and fucking nail it. Because what I want to hear in my ear is the beauty of my skill in this instrument. And I think that's real midnight zone stuff around goals. Like, you want to learn to do this thing, or you want to be able to do this thing. And the journey of building a skill to achieve a different goal than the one you've achieved before is ugly. And the more competent you were in last year's skill, the more resistant you might be to that ugliness.
Yeah.
And I have really had to just like sit in that. And now I wait until like Ed is out of the house. Like, I don't want anyone to hear. I've had to basically create these guardrails so I can make the ugly sounds and my ego can take it.
Yeah, that's so interesting because there's such a direct analog to what's going on in organizations, in the sense that in your cello practice, you have a space where you can practice, and it's not all performance all the time. And in many organizations, we're on stage from the very first meeting to the very last meeting. There is no time for ugly sounds. Like, the Twilight Zone stuff in our organization is such that I need to be on every single time. And if I need to be on and not make mistakes, then I'm going to play a much smaller game. And I'm going to play that game really well. And then, across an organization, we ask ourselves, well, why aren't we taking big swings? Why aren't we taking risks? Because everybody is having to play perfectly all the time. And as a leader, I would be thinking about, all right, well, where can we actually create some practice spaces? Like, do we have to treat every single thing from the most mundane weekly meeting to the board meeting that happens, twice a year as the same stakes? Because I see a lot of treating everything with the highest stakes in a lot of organizations. And that is a unwholesome place for human beings to be.
It's such a good point, Sam. And it's like, if I think about projects that I advise or have been part of, asking people to do a meeting where they're actually making something together. And sometimes there is like real resistance to just saying to a team, look, we need to work on this asset, or we need to do this design, or we need to think about what this agenda. We're just going to get together, and in the hour, we're just going to make it. And people get mad at that idea. And so then they'll be critical of it. They'll be like, that's not real work, and that's a waste of time, and that's blah, 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 which is just, that's just me not wanting to make up. That's just me playing the box suite. And often I'll see people in those situations be like, no, I'll go and make it by myself, and then I'll bring something pretty back here. And to your point, it's because like it is just performance. Every meeting is meant to be a box suite. And if that's all you ever want to play, great. But like probably you're going to have to eventually, or you're going to want to eventually do something different. And that's going to require ugly sounds.
Yeah. Well, and you may not be able to remember this because you are such a accomplished cellist, but when you were learning the things that you can play amazingly well now, maybe as a small child, I bet you made some ugly sounds.
I'm sure.
We'd ask your mom.
I'm sure I did.
I'm sure she would tell us.
Yeah,
and
I'm sure.
We've like put that so far out of our head because for the longest time, if you want to make pretty sounds, you can. And
right.
I wonder in organizations, if your entire career has been in the types of organizations that we often work with or we know, where did you even develop the expertise to do the stuff that you think you do really well? Like, I don't know. Maybe you do. Maybe you're a genius in it and you just can, but I don't know. Like we need time and space to mess around and be bad and get better and not feel like it's existential.
And I think this is the root of so much of what happens in the Sunshine Zone. The Sunshine Zone is inherently, it is performative. It's the end result that's like the polished org chart or op model or strategy or a set of goals or whatever. But like that messiness and even just, I'm just going to like keep going with this cello example because I think it's right. It's like it is as anyone is trying to learn something new, it requires like creativity, and creativity requires messiness. And if you're going to learn how to improvise, or you're going to learn how to use AI, or you're going to learn how to be in feedback with your customers every day, or whatever you're going to learn to do that you've never done before, it requires creative approaches, many of which aren't going to work. So I say this because even in learning how to improvise, the first way that everybody learns and fucks this up is you learn like a lick or like 8 bars that sounds good. And then every time you have a solo, you play it, which isn't really improvisation. Yeah. It's just a different version of being able to prepare and perform correctly. But like, I think as adults, we want to get back into the rut of where we're good so badly that we will do anything to be like, oh, this is like this, and now I'm going to do this because this is the thing I know how to do. And it takes real Twilight Zone shit to not do that.
Yeah. What is one example of a Twilight Zone shit that can help make that shift in an organization?
Ooh.
I mean, I think you gave one already about doing a working session together and like relaxing the idea that somebody has to have brought a perfectly polished thing to show the rest of us before we can like jam on it together.
Look, I'll give you a great example from yesterday. We're having conversations right now about growth and how we want to do that differently or similarly than we've done it in the past. And I was in a meeting yesterday, and Colin, who's like our revenue dude, just brought a bunch of information. He just brought data, and he brought screenshots from Notion, and he put it in a Notion board. And basically he showed it to us and was like, what do you make of it? That's messy. That's messy. Most people in that role show up to that meeting with someone in my role saying, I did a bunch of analysis. Here's the story. Here's the action plan. I'm recommending this. Do you agree? Putting it out there and going, I don't know what the fuck this means. Do we know what the fuck it, and the truth is no, we do not. But the first step of figuring it out is looking at it and thinking about it and being in a conversation about it and asking questions that we don't have answers to for an hour and coming out and being like, okay, well, here are 2 things we could do next. That is messy. That is ugly sounds, man.
Yeah.
What about you? What kind of messiness do you make your clients do or invite your clients to do with love?
Where my head goes, I'm thinking, I keep kind of coming back to this goal setting example. And in the goal setting example, we were talking about, or the client of ours was talking about how they want to basically, instead of having this be an individual exercise across an entire organization, like bring people together in a room cross-functionally. And if we're going to set goals, let's do it in a cross-functional, messy sort of way. And I think there's something to that, whether it's like big room planning or kind of forcing cross-functional conversations that aren't going to happen naturally. I feel like a lot of my role in our projects is to force or encourage people who normally aren't in a room together on any sort of cadence to get in a room together and just talk about things, make information transparent to each other, rely on the fact that people are creative and want to kind of pull in the same direction on stuff. And just because we are in different functions or different teams or different divisions or whatever, if our work implies that we should be talking to each other, we should be doing that. And I'm kind of gobsmacked how frequently I feel like I'm doing this very simple thing of being like, you all are supposed to be working on this thing together, and yet I don't see you ever together talking. Like, should we just get in a room for 90 minutes and see what comes up? And almost always it is very valuable.
Yeah. I've definitely gotten my wrist slapped at clients for doing that. Have you?
Yeah. A little bit, but
a little bit.
That's what we're there for. Like, we can
where
get our
someone will
slapped.
Be like, why are these people invited?
Yeah.
Yeah. Or sometimes there's a little bit of like, you work over here. Why are you talking to these people? Why are you inviting these people to these meetings? We didn't ask their manager if they could whatever. And I'm like, do you want to get the work done or not, man?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and sometimes the answer is they don't want to get the work done. And there's actually other stuff going on, like politically and things like that. In that case, I don't know, usually project's not long for this world at that point.
Fair enough. Yeah. I think the other thing that keeps popping to mind about this is a lot of the like literature about goal setting I don't particularly enjoy. Because like, for example, like SMART goals, which everybody loves a SMART goal. The A is for achievable. And I think that setting an achievable goal necessarily requires you to know how you're going to achieve it. And I think there can be a lot of value in setting a goal that you don't know how to achieve. Now, I don't think that we should just like take wild swings that are not based in any data or any research or any conversation with customers or the world. But I've found a lot of value in being part of teams that set a really ambitious goal that is a little unreasonable. And then the pressure becomes on the Twilight Zone to figure it out.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I just think that's a much more interesting stance.
Totally. I think that's a good example of like a positive approach or positive perspective on a sunshine zone thing. And not just a lot of our conversation, I think, for reasons we've already talked about, is about like kind of ameliorating subpar things that are happening in the sunshine zone. And there is still the opportunity for sunshine zone things that fucking slap, are creative as hell, are motivating, and kind of create a wake of positive Twilight Zone and Midnight Zone stuff that is the real opportunity in the Sunshine Zone, not just like making the bad shit slightly less bad.
Yeah, I think that's it. And I think that the idea that a goal is set or an ambition, goals are just ambitions in writing. An idea that an ambition is declared clearly and explicitly, and we don't quite know how we're going to get after it. I think a lot of times leaders, like, that definitely makes them clench up, and they think like, well, that's too loose. If we can't articulate a roadmap or the journey to get there, then we can't say it. And I just don't think that's right. Like, I think the sort of bar raising move, again, grounded in something, probably something sky-like, is really valuable. And I worry less about, I just, I've said this before, I just fundamentally believe that human beings, given the right support, tend to rise to the occasion. And so I just feel like goal setting is such a good opportunity to not sort of create the culture of lowered expectations inside of a company, and to just be like, what if we could do this? Like, what if we could figure it out? And what if we focused in the Twilight Zone on the kind of ugly sound containers, the kind of midnight zone support people might need to be in those spaces? What if we really said, this is the result we want, and we're going to design the system to get it, rather than having so much of the conversation be negotiating the outcome to a point that we can all live with and then ignoring it, which is what I usually see.
Yeah, I love that. That feels like maybe a good place to actually end. What do you think?
I agree.
Yeah.
This is fun.
It was fun. So 3 episodes in the can, a few more to go. As always, please like, rate, and review us on your various platforms of choice. And if you have a gnarly cross-functional problem, like the goal setting one that we just did an entire episode about, please shoot us an email at depthfinding@theready.com.
The music for this miniseries is Yagadang by BG and Coyote Radio. This show is produced by our friend Jack Van Amberg and engineered by Taylor Marvin. Our team at The Ready makes it all happen by helping companies solve their biggest cross-functional problems out in the world so that we can tell you about it. Thanks so much for listening.